these big countdown clocks.
Sorry, the break is after we're done, so I hope you'll stay to listen. As you will notice, this is today's only all-women's panel, so I'm thrilled to be moderating this. So thank you so much for being here. When we think of artificial intelligence, we think of big data, buying recommendations on mass platforms like Alibaba or Amazon. But given the values of exclusivity, personalization, and fine-tuned craftsmanship, we're going to talk today about the best ways to apply this emerging technology without risking the dilution of those core values for luxury. And we have a really great group of thoughtful and experienced panelists here to talk about how the luxury business is integrating a new era of anything from facial recognition to smart robotics. So we have here today Cindy Chow, who's an exclusive jewelry designer, Sabrina Fung, Group Managing Director of Fung Retailing Group, and Dee Poon, Managing Director of Brands and Distribution for Eskel Group. So I'm going to start with you, Cindy. So you are an incredibly exclusive craftswoman. You make about, you told me, 15 masterpiece collection a year and about 200 for your white label collection. And you only have basically 100 customers sort of in your database, if you will. So what are the applications of sort of automated technology for such a high craftsmanship, high touch, hand-oriented business?
Okay. So in jewelry making, there are two categories. And one is a mass production, and the other one is one of a kind of a design. In mass production, people can use a computer technology to create a large number of prototypes in a such short time. So in the mass production, AI can play a role which will be able to create, to increase the production quantity and try to lower the production cost. On the other hand, in one-of-a-kind design, creator more focus on unique and one-of-a pieces, which we will pay more attention to the different type of gemstone properties and try to use the different material, which is such as a titanium that I personally like to use very much because it allows me to create bigger pieces to express my creativity and also to make the pieces very light. Titanium is a very light material to use. And to give an idea, titanium is the material also to use to make the airplanes. So, however, titanium is very difficult to work with, which is, it's much harder than gold. And also, the melting point of the titanium is 1,600 degrees, which require the craftsman to have such a skill has to have at least 15 years professional background to work with the titanium. So therefore, there are many, very, very few people will be able to work on the titanium nowadays. And also, it's very hard to find the people, especially nowadays, for the younger generation. They don't want you to join this industry. So this is probably something in the future that we hope will be, the problem will be solved by the AI that will be, giving this AI to replace the human power. Yeah.
And are there things that you currently use technologically, like 3D printers or scanners to make prototypes?
Yeah, we do. It's more like simple prototypes, but for one-of-a-kind, it's very hard.
Right.
Yeah.
So switching to the other end of the spectrum, Sabrina, you have experience with all kinds of products ranging from, like you said, a $1 bottle of water and Disney character products all the way up to the Delvaux handbags and the bespoke men's suits. So what have you learned from sort of the applications of technology and automation on the mass market side that you might apply to the luxury side?
Well, first of all, the way I see AI is that we actually have evolved the term from artificial intelligence to augmented intelligence. So I think out in the press, there's been a lot of talks or debates about is it going to be the man or the machine who's winning the game. So within our retail experience, what I found is that it's really a enhanced man that's utilizing the high-tech technology of a machine. So that's why in my world, I call AI really augmented intelligence and not artificial intelligence. And especially in a market like China, I think all the, whether it's luxury brands or mass brands, they're really after the millennial crowds. And by definition, millennials are much more mobile savvy. So, you know, with what we're doing in the portfolio, we're definitely using a lot of database driven information to try to enhance the frontline staff to better serve our customers, be it on the mass end side or the luxury side.
On the luxury side, given the sort of sense of exclusivity, perhaps privacy, I don't know if this is an issue for your customers, but on the luxury end, is there any concern that all this data mining might make the customer feel uncomfortable, or is that not really an issue for you?
Well, I think in today's day and age, people really have a general sensitivity towards data and like security. But I think for luxury, that human touch and the interaction between really the shop staff and the customer is really so personalized. I think it's a whole package and the whole ambiance on how you would help him or her. I think given our bespoke tailoring business or even the high-end ladies' bag business, at the end of the day, you know, personalization is also a very big trend today in luxury. If using certain data can help a consumer, you know, get the personalized product that they want, I think very often they're not that resistant to that.
And Dee, you've talked about your passion of improving the workplace. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how automation actually helps with that. Like on the one hand, from a kind of labor point of view, there's this question of whether automation might threaten to take away people's jobs. On the other hand, you've talked a little bit about how it might actually improve the workplace. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
So Esquel, for all of you who don't know, is a vertically integrated cotton manufacturer. And we actually start with cotton farms, and we gin, spin, weave, and knit, as well as do cut and sew. And I actually run our brands and distribution business. So we really believe that the role of technology is to drive productivity and workplace experience. And so whether our goal is better quality, or how to re-engage our workforce, right? We've really leveraged, whether it's big data, sensors, or automation, to drive changes across all these different realms. So things we'll do, historically, you might consider, you know, workplace safety. How does technology help that? Well, we've deployed sensors against most of our floor to try to see if machines are working well or badly. And depending on that, we can understand and help workers avoid things or fix things in a different way. In terms of AI, right? So before, when you did fabric inspection, somebody would stand in front of the machine and go like this every time there was a defect. Today, we're using visual AI and training against that with a person, and we've actually managed to reduce the defect missing rate from 5 to 0%. And so there's actually a lot of different ways. I think we tend to think of garment making and textile apparels as very polluting and very much a low skill type of work where a lot of things can then go wrong. So our view is we should really use all of the technologies at hand to ensure that as economies grow, especially in places where we work like China, we can continue to grow the productivity of each worker so they continue to have better life, and also use some of these technologies against problems like sustainability.
And what are some of the things, I think you mentioned when you talked about automation, though, that there are still things that you wouldn't think necessarily that you still need humans to do, but are really difficult to emulate. Can you talk a little bit about what are the things that machines really can't do and that you still need humans for?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with Sabrina that it's not a question of like robots versus the world. The reality is we're still in a stage where whether it's like AI, right? So visual AI helps the person make the final thing. Or in robotics, you have AI driving some intelligence, but it doesn't actually go into the real world. So you still need the robotic function. The robotics are not good enough to do a lot of very small things. So the idea of picking up one piece of fabric to be sewn, you have so many nerves in your fingers, that's just A computer can't do that yet. So we can deploy robotic arms against like very big things, like a spinning, like a spinning gear, but you really can't do it for the really hand-based crafts. So it still takes time.
Speaking of hand-based crafts, Sabrina, on the bespoke end, how do you guarantee your customers that you really are getting this custom hand-tailored suit and we're not just sending it off to some factory somewhere to be mass-produced behind your back? How do you kind of guarantee that luxury quality in an age of automation where people might be making some assumptions?
Well, and that's why I think depending on the industry, there are certain aspects within a process of making the bespoke that just cannot be replaced by a machine. So our bespoke service is still on a very traditional Savile Row in London, #1 Savile Row in Gives and Hawkes. And I think we actually just use the technology to help showcase to the customers, these are the 100 choices of a shirt fabric you could use without having to stock the fabric at our showroom, right? But the experience of the tailor still measuring, our customer still going for the 3 to 4 fittings, everything is hand cut, hand sewn right there and then. That process really can't be replaced. But if you talk about the variety and the options of how you would pair the top with the bottom, what shirt to go with it, what tie, it's endless using the AI technology. So it's really a combination of an enhanced consumer experience.
Cindy, can you see some kind of application along those lines? I know that you only show exclusively in showroom. You don't sell through any retail. It's all in exclusive.
We don't so far, yeah.
So is there an application for showing customers kind of various options that automation or AI might help for you? Or is that something that you just really want to keep all very high-end human touch?
I think so far we still wanted to keep this kind of losing hand craftsmanship as a very high-end jewelry. So far we don't really practice with AI that much, but in the future, we do hope this will help our industry. Because now we are running a situation, we are actually lacking of these older talents will be able to carry on this hand craftsmanship. And I believe in the near future, AI will plays an important role to help all these craftsman issue to be more productive. Yeah.
One thing that our bespoke customers like to use, which you may check out, is that there's now technology where you could pretty much zap a photo anywhere in the world, just on the street, with an outfit or a handbag or jewelry, and the data that's backed up in the software, it could identify what brand it is. At some point in the future, maybe even what material it's made from. So that's made it easy for us to try to comprehend what personalization a customer may need.
And I think, Sabrina, you had also talked about some of the lessons that you've learned from the mass market of increasing speed to market, and how in the past people might see something at a runway show and it's going to take months before they can purchase something equivalent. And you were talking about sort of help, automation can help improve that speed to market.
Right, so at Li & Fung, which is our sister company to Fung Retailing, we do sourcing. With a brand, let's say like a Tommy Hilfiger. Before, when you go to a fashion show, you would see the models on the runway, and you really won't be able to buy those items until it's 6 or 9 months after the show on the shelf. But right now, with a very well-planned process beforehand and before the show, really figuring out what materials and what silhouettes and what colors we would need to go through a factory to make that, we can actually do see now, buy now, which is when a consumer attends a fashion show, it could already instantly zap at the image, buys it, and have it delivered to your home the next day. And that is in partnership, of course, with the supply chain.
Dee, you've talked about, you just mentioned your focus on commitment to sustainability. How might automation help with that? You've talked about reducing, say, water usage. Can you talk a little bit about, in the manufacturing process, what are some of the things you've been thinking about that?
It's actually really interesting. So yesterday, we had a quick chat, and I don't know how many of you know, but textiles are the second most polluting industry in the world. Right? And so whether it's the fact that we contribute 34% of the microfibers in the sea, or that a lot of dyeing mills actually don't treat water very well, or the amount of water required in finishing, for us not to tackle the sustainability problem is basically 100% irresponsible in our view. So what we've learned is that, and a little bit of history. So my family it's a family business, and starting from Shanghai in the 1920s, we were in silk, and my grandfather moved into cotton in the 60s. You know, even back then, they would test a dye vat first with their elbows, right? And then they moved on and they became very artisanal. And so, you know, some guy had a formula and they, you know, then they had thermometers and stuff. And I'm still talking like 60s, 70s. But there was no single, there was no general solution. And it was not until the 90s that we started really just programming machines to dye things. So you can just, from that example, you can see how much wastage and how much could go wrong, right, in these systems. How can you treat water if you don't know how much dye is in it? How much heat are you going to waste if you're sort of playing it by ear on how long you're going to, you know, put that fabric in the vat? And so with every increment of technology, we can actually use that information not only to make better products and to make more stable products, but also to optimize things like water usage, chemical usage, and understand how to treat it. So when it comes out the other end, we can use it, like it can go back into the environment or it can be reused.
So do you already have some kind of achievements on that front that you can talk about in terms of water reduction?
So we started calculating about 2004, 2005, and in the last 12 years, we've actually per unit reduced water consumption and emissions by more than 50%. And it's literally everything from very small things, like how, you know, at one point, so one of the things about us is we're vertical. So when we take fabric, we actually control the entire process. A lot of times if you buy fabric, how much is in a roll is not standard, right? So that'll affect how you work on each next part. So it's all these levels of standardization, process improvement, changing the ways, you know, one of the things we talk about is non-sizing of yarn. I don't know how many of you know what that is and how many of you care. Basically when, you know, so there's a warp and a weft in a woven yarn, and sizing is a process by which they almost compact it further with chemicals and then they have to wash it off. One of the things we've done is we've actually been able to non-size, I can't remember if it's the warp or the weft, but that obviously reduces a lot of the burden on energy and water usage. And so it's just using, you know, technology, thoughts, and beliefs to solve these problems. And of course, every process you reduce, it reduces uncertainty and it stabilizes quality, right? So it's actually good business equals being green, full stop.
Cindy, you had talked, we were at dinner the other night, and you had mentioned that something like 1/3 of your customers are actually buying your products for investment purposes.
Yeah,
they're
30%,
they're not going to wear it or give it as a gift. They're going to just put it in the safe. Do you think as we move into this era of more automation that handcrafted products are going to appreciate and value much more quickly?
I think it's become more rare and rare as a collector's perspective. As I mentioned to you, 30% of my collectors, they are male collectors. And when I ask them, like, okay, do you give to your wife or you give to your daughter? They say, no, we just put it in safe and I appreciate it as a piece of art. So from their perspective, I think they appreciate this hand craftsmanship and to treat it as a piece of art and also value it as an investment too.
Mm-hmm. But do you think that because we are now in an age of automation that your products will appreciate and value more quickly, or?
I do hope so.
Fair enough. So let's talk about facial recognition. So I was hearing actually from Adrian Cheng, who was on a panel that I moderated yesterday, that he's started to think of ways in which you could make a reservation for a restaurant or buy a ticket for a concert or make a reservation for a hotel, and you show up and the scanner recognizes your face and that's your entry into the event. I don't know if there's some way in which you could also use it for branding or customer customization or personalization, but maybe Sabrina, is this something that you've thought about?
Actually, at Feng Retailing, we have a partnership with JD.com where we're actually investigating the use of a manless convenience store. So I was just chatting with Motoko in the restroom. how in China you could really go through living there for an entire month without ever pulling out your wallet. And I gave her the story of, I walked into a Starbucks, bought a cup of cappuccino, and whipped out the equivalent of a $10 bill. The girl looked at me in disgust and said, "What do you mean I have to give you change?" So I thought, well, that's okay, let me take out my credit card. Then it was a worse move because she had never seen a credit card before, because these are very young millennials. She had no idea how you would swipe it. Everything in China is now through like WePay or Alipay. So in the convenience store business, we're always trying to trim down the checkout time. So with our collaboration at JD, we're now trying to prototype a process in which we would shorten the checkout time from 6 seconds to 4.5 seconds. And once that can be done, the next phase would be the manless department store. And there's actually, for those of you who visit the JD compound in Beijing, they already have a prototype where your face is linked to your WePay and your Alipay account. And when you walk into the entrance of the store, once they recognize you, that is already your payment mechanism. You go into a store where every product is tagged with an RFID mechanism, you put it in your basket, and then once you're done with your shopping, you walk out with the basket or with your plastic bag, and you don't have to even whip out the phone and sort of go zap at the WePay. Your face is already the ID plus the payment system. So that's what we're working towards.
On the flip side, let's talk about that from the luxury perspective. I mean, I'm coming from Japan, where of course it's an incredibly high-touch, high-service market that no transaction can happen without extensive wrapping and interaction with the shopkeeper, your walk to the door. Obviously, that's very exclusive to Japan in their kind of culture of service. But on the other hand, I would think that most luxury customers want more than a 4-second transaction if they're going to be spending so much money. How are you going to kind of mesh that, the need for speed and efficiency with the desire for service and
well, luxury spending in our experience has always been very emotional, right? And in a lot of the cases, the transactions per day may be low, but any customer who walks in are usually very demanding compared to the ones who walk into a convenience store. So now we're also looking into a technology from Silicon Valley where it enhances the customer service and the sort of interface level, where the CRM data of your consumer are really at the palm of the salesperson. So again, we're also testing facial recognition at the store level, that when the consumer walks in, the storekeeper already knows that's Miss Poon or Miss Chow, and we'll have all the data that which color handbag you've bought when, which style you like, so to really offer a more sort of engaged and higher level of service for them.
Are you also thinking of that, Dee? Is that something?
I mean, I'm actually just thinking at a sort of macro scale, given what we've been talking about, is really what we're talking about is how to best deploy technologies against the customer experience and your brand proposition, right? So whether it's in a bespoke jewelry setting, being able to prototype that item with very similar things so that the person can be very happy about it. But at the same time, it's like art, right? So there are photographs, and they can come in editions, but they are less than a masterpiece painting. A masterpiece painting is also not just about the hand, right? You can go to a village in China and they can paint anything you want for you, but it's about the concept. And so what we really have to think about rather than be afraid of is what we're bringing to the world and how we can leverage technologies to drive the customer experience, to optimize our processes, whatever it is we need to do, but against this value set of what we're really trying to bring to the world. And again, it could be sustainability, it could be craft, but how to give everybody more using this rather than just thinking that it will take our place.
Mm. Yeah. Well, let's think about that in terms of giving more. With a pie shirt, what might you be able to do with all this technology outside of sort of more on the customer facing side rather than on the manufacturing side?
Like one of the things we're playing with is a tool, not for pie, but for another brand that we have, that uses, so anybody takes a picture with their smartphone and against the cloud where there's big data, it can size you. And I think one of the problems with e-commerce historically has always been sizing.
That would really work? They'd be able to tell your size? You were just talking in the room beforehand about how everybody's a medium. Wouldn't it just spit out medium?
Sorry?
You said
were
everyone-
just
Oh no,
talking
the
about
joke is,
sizing.
so this is the joke. If I ask you what size you are, you're a medium.
Right,
But
everybody says
especially in men's, right? Like Sabrina, we were talking about vanity sizing, we were talking about grade rules, how things jump. The reality is no size means anything. And especially in a world with personalization, and you know, everybody wants their size. But the reality is, what is your size? And even if it's personalized, how you like it to fit is going to completely change what the spec of that size should be, right? And so before going into all of those hard things, the first thing is like, how do you define what your measurements are against the measurements of a garment that may or may not exist, whether it should be made for you or not for you? And so my point is, one of those first things we're trying is just some type of technology to see if this works. And so I think there's a lot of ways we can help the consumer, that from there you could go to a 3D rendering of a garment, right? Like, so if you're in Japan and you want to buy a shirt from me, okay, now you figured out your size, now you want to see what it looks like, and we can do this with great reality, right? Like your picture in it. So it's like you're now walking down a Net-a-Porter or Mr. Porter like video, and it's all done over the internet, it's not real. Does that drive the same tactility and emotion that you get from shopping in a store? No, and that's why I don't think stores are going away. But can we do a lot for people to enjoy these things? Yeah.
Well, it's a lot of people who would appreciate that convenience.
Yeah, like
probably.
VR, like we have our own cotton farms and they are amazing places, right? And using VR to take you there is something that's very different that we could not do before. Of course, it's not the same as a beautiful photograph that's got a view and that's, you know, so there are different ways that these experiences will evolve, and I don't think we can guess what they are. I think we all sort of have to try and see what works. A lot of flinging spaghetti, you know?
Well, what are some of the risks? Are there fears that you have that you could take the technology in a direction, or you could do something that could damage your relationship with your customers or your brand? Sabrina, you want to take that first?
Well, you know, a big topic of debate these days, of course, is the security issue, right? It's good that, you know, the ease of living, you know, with never having to bring out your wallet and so forth. But on the other hand, you know, do you really want to be tracked, like where you go for your Starbucks every day, where you park your car, what time you go to the, you know, Circle K and buy your water, or...
Is there anyone who wants to be tracked that much?
Well, it depends, right? I mean, as a mom, you know, I would love to track my children that way.
But your children don't want to be tracked that way.
Exactly. So I think that's going to be a big debate. I even heard, you know, like the iPhone is very popular in Asia and America, but not so in Europe because it's a bigger issue there. And when you talk about facial recognition, it's great that it's so convenient. You don't have to even bring out your iPhone. But then what if someone takes a picture of you and just scans it through? So all these things at the developmental level, we haven't ironed it out yet. So that's all still at the experimental stage.
What about you, Dee? What are your fears of how technology might be misapplied in your business?
I think everybody's worried about data privacy right now. And I think, you know, the debate of who owns your data, it's real, right? Especially as we get more personalized, get more information, not just your shopping preferences. I think the scary one we've all heard is the woman like at Walmart who, you know, they knew she was pregnant before her dad knew, stuff like that.
Target, yeah.
But I think these things move as quickly. The minute there's a problem, I think that's why there's been so much talk about blockchain, right? Privacy, the ability to own your own data. I don't think, you know, I think it's sensitive, but I hope that we'll be able to find a way. And as a community, I think people will force a solution.
Are there anything that you're doing in particular to try to protect against data breaches, or that you're thinking when you're talking with contractors who might be working with you on?
I mean, honestly, so I spend so much time on IT, and it's really funny. I recently joined a new board, and like the day after I got my first board papers, there was a very highly targeted hack against me, like 1,000 attempts from 20, like, you know, from all the countries around the world. And so I could keep on getting calls from my IT head. It got to the point where the first day there were no more hacking attempts. He was like, congratulations, it's over. And I was like, okay. So, you know, we're vigilant and we try, but I think everyone in this room probably knows about Cathay and the 9.4 million account information that they got stolen. It's just hard, you know? So I think in good faith, we try everything we can do, and that's the best I can say.
We can open it up to questions from the floor now. Do we have anybody right here?
We hear a lot about AI and its effect on the workers of the world, and they always say, that's why you should be creative, because there's no way AI is going to replace the role of a creative person because it can't understand art or design or anything like that. But do you think that's true? And do you think that one day we might be heading towards a world where, in fact, you don't need humans to create ideas or designs? And could that job actually be done by an AI?
Well, why don't we let Cindy take that question? Can AI replace human creativity and artisanship? Isn't that your basic question? That we're a world where we don't need humans to create anything?
I think so far that AI still doesn't have that ability to have the human's emotion, creativity especially. Just something that I think they're very good at technical supply, but this is something in terms of creative, I think they still has way to achieve that. Have I answered your question?
Anyone else?
Maybe I could just add, I think, Sean, I think that's why, I spoke about the augmented intelligence instead of just artificial. And I think also to Dee's point, I also don't believe the offline stores are going to disappear anytime soon. If you even take, China again as an example, which is, a big market, I interviewed so many millennials, and these days, with the Taobaos of the world and Alibaba and the Suning and the JD, you really almost never have to leave your home. I was just telling the panel how you could get your grocery delivered in 30 minutes now, but there's still going to be a social component of it. With the one-child policy, I find that a lot of the millennials still go to the shopping malls. Why? Not necessarily because they want to shop or even deal with the size, but there's this human interaction, this whole social bit that I also think is not going to go away anytime soon, right? So I think besides the efficiency of AI, I think a lot of because I also saw one of the panelists in the last panel, spoke via, Skype. I was also in the guinea pig session at Harvard Business School where they had the first distance learning, session. And the conclusion again was you can't really replace face-to-face classroom time with video conferencing or Skype and so forth. So there's still a social element or a human interaction component that I think is going to stay.
Do we have any other questions from the floor? Shirley, right here. David.
Hi, for the entire panel, but particularly for Dee, when you think about automation and AI making things more efficient, particularly in farming and very labor-intensive industries, what then responsibility do companies have to think about things like job retraining and making sure that some of these displaced jobs, the individuals, have something to do?
So let me first start by saying that one of the things we must all be cognizant of is the countries that have invested the most in AI are actually the countries with the greatest demographic challenges. Okay, so whether it's the US or China or Japan, why are people looking to do this? Is because they realize that one day they're going to have to drive productivity and growth against these demographic challenges. So, the fashion, like the cut and sew industry has traditionally been one of chasing cheaper and cheaper workers. And our view is exactly the opposite of that. We enter an economy, we started in China, we are now in places, we're in Malaysia, right? Back in the day, Malaysia was also a very cheap country. Today, Malaysia is by no means cheap. And our view is we should stay there and work in the community and not leave because it's gotten expensive. And that's actually why we focus so much on things like automation and changing. So like China, we're celebrating our 40th anniversary this year. And over the last 40 years, you can imagine the profile of a worker has changed a lot, right? So today, 10% of our site is engineers. Now, if we were not changing the way we actually built our product against the way what types of jobs people wanted, the reality is we would not be able to find workers anyway. So I think the question is not do people who move to AI need to be responsible for job loss? But rather, why are you using AI in the first place? And what is your view of how you treat your workforce and how you engage with your workforce in the first place? So I will tell you, like at Eskel, we have closed factories. I think the last factory we closed in Hong Kong was in the early, like 2003, 2004. And we made sure every last worker had a job when we shut down. We gave them a lot of lead time. And that's part of our view of how this business should be run. Is everybody else like that? Probably not. But that's how we see it.
What kind of jobs did you get for these workers that were displaced by
Honestly,
technology?
I wasn't working yet then.
Right.
So I cannot 100%, I'm not going to promise you that I'm going to tell you it right. But it's interesting because we still have, we have reunions occasionally. And Gordon is here with me. He's from our corporate communications department before. He just worked on our book. And last year, so we invited a bunch of them back to interview them. And, they're still friends. They miss the company. I think sometimes it's about the environment as much as, and the support, the way you drive culture that is what makes a good company, as much as, the basics like wages, on-the-job training, all of these things.
Do we have any other burning questions? If so, we have time for one more. Oh, here we go. We have one more here. Do we have a microphone?
Can I just jump in before that one? Two very quick questions. What happens when the workforce don't have any more money? Where do your consumers come from? And secondly...
I'm going to hold you to one question because this person
Okay, just one little quick question. Sabrina, what advice are you giving your children in terms of their careers in the future and how you're educating them in this changing world?
You want to answer that question first, or the children? Okay.
On the children.
On the children side,
children.
I'm a little bit of a non-mainstreamer. My husband is sitting here right now. He's looking at me. So I think in this day and age of a sort of an environment that is filled with so much data and gadget and electronic stuff, I'm very pro sort of old school reading a book, having a conversation at dinner without an iPad. I've got friends, children who can't eat without an iPad. So in my house, I was like, well, that's going to be tough luck. Then you won't get dinner then. So because I so believe in still the human interaction, that whole interactive aspect of the culture. So I'm actually, I know all this is going to be a part of their lives, whether it's Instagram, it's Snapchat, it's Facebook, it's everything digital. AI, I heard a professor at Stanford once said, he likened it to the discovery of electricity. So we now all talk about the digital department or an AI department, but you don't see an electricity department anywhere now, right? So AI is going to be as rampant as that. It's going to be that important as that. So I think, with my next generation, I'm actually going the other way and make sure that they really keep that human interface intact.
So I did want to give you an opportunity to ask, but we are out of time, so I'm wondering if you could talk to them off stage. And we are going on to break, and we need to be back in this room by 3:50. So thank you very much to our panelists. That was an excellent conversation. I really appreciate it.